All right, so the second derivative test. This is how it's useful. So this example wants us to find the stationary points for the function and then use the second derivative test to determine the nature of those stationary points. So the stationary points are either going to be, like I said before, a turning point or a point of inflection. So let's find the first derivative. The stationary point is when what? Perfect. When this equals 0. So let's make that equal to 0. What's the common factor? So then, using the null factor law, 6x is equal to 0, or 0 equals x plus 1. So x is equal to 0, or x is equal to negative 1. Another way to do it is to bring the 6x over like this, and then divide by 6x on both sides. But that only tells you one of the stationary points, right? So you would have to remember that you could also sub in x equals 0 to get the other answer. So what's the next step? So we sub in these two x's into the original equation. So x equals 0 is quite easy. You get negative 8. So the stationary point is 0, negative 8. So that's going to be either a turning point or an inflection point at that point. This one's a bit trickier. So putting x is equal to negative 1 into this. Okay, so this is the first stationary point. This is the second stationary point. So we've got our two stationary points. Okay, so now let's have a look at the second derivative, see what it tells us. So this was the first derivative, second derivative, bring the power out the front, and minus 1 from the power, so you're left with that. So now we can sub in two x values to see what the nature of those two stationary points are. So I guess this is probably useful only if you're doing a tech free. Like if it's a tech active, you just graph it and it tells you. Or, I mean, you just look at the graph and hopefully it's obvious. Okay, so we've got this one is equal to positive 6 and this one is equal to negative 6. So does anyone know what that means? Notes quickly. The second derivative is greater than 0, it's concave up and it's a minima. If it's less than 0, it's concave down and it's a maximum. I'll just say this last thing. If I happen to get one of them equal to 0, so instead of negative 6 or 6, one was equal to 0, this is either inflection or turning point. So to figure out which one it is, so you'll probably do a question like this. You need to do, you need to sub in like slightly less than A. So if A was equal to 1, say I subbed in 1, you would sub in like 0.9. and 1.1. So it's kind of either side of the a value if a was equal to 1. Does that make sense? So that's only if this happens to equal to 0.